And everyone, just a note, I am recording the program and we'll make this available. I think we're going to be able to make this available on our website. So more to come on that. And I'll just record the program portion of it. All right, Roseanne, all yours.
Should I share the screen now?
Sure. And just a little share about intro, maybe, about the program.
Okay. I'm not sure I can do that. Anyway, when I started working on this, I realized that I had given my folder on Pumpkintown to a gentleman who was going to do a book about it. And so I really didn't have anything. And luckily, Julie came forward and brought me a whole bunch of stuff from our society's collection that had been given to it from Bainbridge Parsons back in 2008. Carolyn Zamarki had sat down with Bainbridge Parsons, whose family probably knows the most about Pumpkintown, and had given over his writings, and Carolyn Bowe, another member of our society, typed them up. And Carol gave a number of talks that year in different places about Pumpkintown. So that's the extent of really what we had about Pumpkintown, other than the Parsons memories and some deeds and some pictures from the work that Silas Weeks had done in surveying it with his students. So along came 2017, and we have the York Wild and Scenic River Archaeological Report, which really added to that and gives us a lot more information about the people that were there and what was going on there. So basically my talk is going to be using a lot of the pictures from Bainbridge and a lot from that study. So let me see if I can share the screen, if I can get it moving here.
And Tracy, could you explain to the people, I don't know, like Julie changed our mode so that the speaker has a large part of the screen and the participants are a small one rather than everybody having a little piece. Then again, it doesn't matter, I guess, if it's all set up like this.
Yeah, so that will happen as we're doing presentations. And what's really cool about Zoom, and some of you probably have already experienced it, is we can actually run videos, we can run PowerPoint slides, I can share my screen and do all kinds of things. So it makes it a really nice medium for us to use for these types of programs. And we can have people call in from all across the country and world. And so we're excited about this. So yeah, so this is what will happen. You'll see, you'll be minimized over to the right. We'll do program, and then we can open it up for Q&A at the end, and we can unmute everybody at that time. I think this goes for how long, Roseanne, roughly, do you think, this presentation?
I have no idea. It might go for days. I'm not sure. No, you told me to keep it short. I don't know if I can keep it short, but if I talk really fast and I move right along, I think we can get it done in about a half an hour.
That's what we think, 30 to 45 minutes, something like that, just in case people need a break or something. So, all right.
Okay, well, for those of you who aren't familiar with where Pumpkintown is located, it's in the eastern part of Elliott, the northeast. It takes in the York Pond area and near the border with South Berwick and York. The York River, or Stony Brook as it's called, also called York Pond Brook, flows from York Pond and goes underneath the roads of Brixham Road and Frost Hill and on into York and out to the Atlantic River, and it's about 13 miles long. This area was first referred to in the deeds as Emeryville, also Emerytown, and today we call it Punkintown. And it was a rural neighborhood whose beginnings go back to the late 17th century. The original lands were mostly from grants to Anthony and James Emory and Nicholas and Charles Frost. between 1640 and 1671. Nicholas Frost's lands, of course, and later his son Charles, extended all the way up to Stony Brook, and the Emorys had about 143 acres by 1694 up in this area. The first inhabitants were probably Simon Emory and his son Stephen and his son Samuel Emory. But the earliest account of activity we have is in 1894, when it appears in a deed that there's a sawmill that's been built by Major Charles Frost and James Emory. And we refer to it as, of course, the Emory Frost Mill, and it was out just on the outside of York Pond. They built a dam and then a mill. And then a second frost dam was built downstream and a grist mill established. And this is what they found in 2017 when they were there for that second mill. In the early 1800s, Thomas and George Bartlett and Daniel Bartlett established a sawmill and then a grist mill. And you can see it, let me see, I gotta go back again. You can see in the bottom is the grist mill, and then Thomas Bartlett's sawmill here in this 1850 map that's done by William Fogg. And in 1859, a man, George Briggs, came down from Portland, Maine, and he bought a half interest in that grist mill, along with the privilege to use the dam and York Pond. And there's a picture of the grist mill and the locations on that map. These are the remnants today that we see there. And there is one foundation, which probably some type of barn. You can see at the bottom, there were a number, oh, can't do it here. There are a number of buildings associated with that grist mill. George and his wife, Hannah, had 6 children, and he bought the home and land of Daniel Bartlett on Brixham Road, who had owned that mill previously, and you can see his home again on this 1850 map. And their daughter, Frances Louise Briggs, she married Millard Goodwin, whose son Harry was Eleanor Pearsall's husband. And they ran Goodwin Garage on Brixham Road for many years. Historic accounts that we have, and especially using a census, tell us that in this vicinity, there were anywhere from 6 to 8 families at any given time, and 36 family members living in the Pumpkintown area. When you think about the forests that were up here, which led to the logging and the early establishment of sawmills and grist mills, there's an indication that there's enough going on here that would sustain a number of families to carry out the work. Grain was being produced in this area, land was being cleared, people were building, they were raising cattle, tanning hides, the freshwater meadows and thatch marshes of York Pond provided sustenance for the animals in the operation. And they also were setting out orchards and also later on some quarries in this area. So I thought the best way to do it would be to take a walk down Pumpkintown Road. And this would be in the 1840 to 1860 period. And along the way, we'll talk about other families that were there before also. This corner is known as Adams Corner, and it was named for Washington Adams, actually George Washington Adams. And he lived at the corner. And we don't really know much about it. We don't really know how he got here. We know he was the son of John and Betsy Stone Adams of Berwick, Maine. But in 1849, he was declared incompetent or non-compos mentis. And it seems that they appointed a guardian and they rented out his house. And later they sold his land and animals and farm. At which time he then boarded with his neighbor Charles Wilson until at least 1855. And then by 1860, he was in the almshouse, which was located on Fore Road. And then until his death in 1876, he was down in the almshouse on Hanscom Road. The neighbor above him was Tirza Emory, who lived to be 103. So she had seen a lot of what was happening in Pumpkintown, and it would have been nice if somebody had interviewed her before she died. And we're not sure when she left her home there, but she lived there most of her life, and she was born there, probably not in the house she was living at the time, but in the family home, which was further along the road. And around 1860, she left Pumpkintown to serve in the home of Mark Wentworth. And by 1870, she was living with Charles and Octavia Stacy on Goodwin Road, where she died. And she's buried in the Raitt family plot on Brixham Road with the James Raitt family. Continuing on, just above Tirza's, we come to what we call Windmill Hill, which was the home of Charles Wilson and later of Charles Jellison. Also living in this area were Eliot Emory and Peggy Warren with her daughter Hannah and her son Levi. Now, Charles Wilson was a farmer, and again, we're not sure when he came here, but he was here by 1870, and he married Elizabeth Beacock, and they had 6 children. They lived in a 1-story house. If you look down at the bottom right, you can see where they lived, and you can see the cemetery where Charles Jellison is buried. And when Charles Wilson died, Elizabeth married Charles Jellison, who worked as a stonecutter, which leads us to believe that he may have been working in the quarry at Pumpkintown at that time. The house was later abandoned and fell down when Elizabeth Jellison now had moved and to live with her son Fred. And what was left of the Wilson land went to the Wilson daughter, Mary Jane Caney of Portsmouth. So by then her family had moved away from Pumpkintown and were living elsewhere. Their son, Fred Wilson, was living with the Parker family down on Brixham Road and worked on their farm. And we believe Charles Wilson is probably buried in the Jellison Cemetery also, because he's not buried with his wife in Mount Pleasant Cemetery, along with her children. Above Wilson was the home of William Simpson, his wife, Sarah, and they had 5 children. And she is buried in the cemetery there. And I might note that both the Simpson and the Jellison cemeteries, we're not sure quite where they are today, but they are mentioned in deeds, and so they are somewhere there. The Simpsons' daughter, Martha Jane Simpson, married Albert Lord, and their daughter, Bertha, was the mother of June Goodwin, who was a member of our society. And I found out during the research that their daughter, Elmina, married Burton Sperry, and they lived on Goodwin Road. And that interested me because their son, Ammon Sperry, married Ruth, who was my babysitter for many, many years while I was going to school. Well, not too many years, maybe 5 years while I was going to school. Next on the road is the home of the Payne family. Oliver Payne and his wife, Peggy Warren. Again, he married the daughter of their neighbor. And they had 5 children, George and Ephraim and Mary and Elmira. Ephraim appears to have died young. And there's also an Alva Darling family, his wife and son living in Pumpkintown also by 1860, although we don't know any further information. And they had quite a spread, I think, for the time, the number of buildings that they had. Oliver and Peggy's son George Payne married Winifred Shorey, and he moved away from Pumpkintown up onto Goodwin Road at the time of his marriage, and he's buried in the Shorey Cemetery in South Berwick. Their son Francis Shorey Payne gave lands which now are part of the Great Works Land Trust holdings near Pumpkintown. Daughter Mary, a seamstress, never married, but she had two daughters, Emma and Nellie Payne. And Emma remained on the farm with her mother and Aunt Elmira, who earned a living as a dressmaker. And it's reported that Elmira had withered legs and was unable to walk and got around using her arms, much like a toad would. We think probably that she may have had polio when she was younger. Nellie Payne worked at Jim Bartlett's farm on Depot Road as a girl, and later she kept house for various people, including George McKay family on Goodwin Road, Julie's grandparents, and she was a pillar of the East Elliott Methodist Church. After Elmira died, she and Nellie and Emma bought a farm on Brixton Road, not too far. And the Parson family said that Emma Payne had a habit of helping herself to things, and said that when Charlie Wilson's house fell down, she helped herself to the boards for firewood. And during Charlie's lifetime, she helped herself to the boards of his barn, which just helped it further to deteriorate. Vandals later destroyed the Payne house after everyone had moved away. And you can see here Mary Payne and Emma standing, Nancy Emory, Decoff, and Mr. Brown, Mary's boyfriend, who probably is the father of her children. In 1955, Emma was 71 years old, and the stories told in the newspaper accounts you can read tell that she went blueberry picking at the, excuse me, somewhere out near the York line. And she got lost, and it got dark, and she didn't make it home, and her neighbor, Stanley Woods, alerted the authorities that she hadn't come home, and they sent a posse out to get her. They had about 100 people looking for her. And Emma tells how, she figured, well, I'm lost, and it was clear that the only thing to do, it was getting dark, was to lay down and go to sleep. So she went to sleep while everybody was looking for her. And the next morning, they sent out bloodhounds to help with the search. And it seemed that Emma made her way to the Rate House at Gould's Corner, which was about 7.5 miles from where she started. And a neighbor took her home, and thus the posse was called off. And Emma said that the only thing that really bothered her was she had a lot of mosquito bites. And these are the graves of Mary and her sister Elmira. And those are the family members that would have been living there at the time. The last home site before crossing Stony Brook was the home of James and Nancy Decoff. Nancy Decoff was the daughter of Enoch and Rhoda Emory. Now, he came from Nova Scotia, and his father was German and his mother English. When he came to this country, he was working on the farm of Thomas Bartlett on Brixton Road. And today that's the home of Arthur Bartlett at Third Hill Farm. It appears they married much later in life. They did have one child who who probably died young. He appears in the census and then at 2 years old, and then in the next census he's gone. And James being 26 years older than Nancy, it's probable that they had no other children. And this is the remains that are there today of the Decock buildings. Now, Pumpkintown, west of the Decock house, is now just a dirt road and lined with walls on both sides. The road has been discontinued past there, and so it leads to a footbridge going across Stony Brook. On the lower right, you're looking toward York Pond. On the upper left, you're looking downstream on Stony Brook. Now we're crossing over into the homeland of Enoch Emory and Ebenezer Plaisted. The house to the right is the Plaisted home, and to the left, the Emory home. The Plaisted home was the largest of the homes in the area, and Ebenezer was a carpenter. He married Eunice Emory, the daughter of Nahum and Sally Emory, which would be the son of Enoch. And inherited all of Nahum's and his father Daniel Emory's land when Nahum died. Their house was built around 1835, and here you can see Ormond Swayze and Nahum Plaisted seated, and then Mary Ann Plaisted Swayze standing, and Electy Goodwin in the carriage. And I wish I had asked Bainbridge who Electy was, but hopefully at some point I can find out who that name belongs to. They had 2 daughters, Sarah Elizabeth and Mary Ann. And Mary Ann married Ormond Swayze, and she lived in the Plaisted home all her life. Ormond was it was a second marriage for him, and they had no children. He was a farmer and a house carpenter, and they married in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Again, here's someone from Lawrence, Mass, and I'm thinking perhaps he came up either to work in the mill or to work in the quarries up there, and met Mary Ann and married her. It was said later in life by Onville Goodwin that Mary had a habit of liking to padlock everything closed, I guess to make sure it was secure. And when she died, he said she must have died of padlock fever. The gatepost that you see outside the town hall today came from that property and was given by William Brackett. And today this is the what you will see. The middle picture is a more recent picture of the foundation. The others were taken 4 years ago. So it's pretty well covered by now. And this is the Plaisted Cemetery not too far from the site where members of the Emory, Plaisted, and Swayze family are buried. There's Plaisted's son, William, was a house carpenter, and he never left home. He stayed there all his life. One of the family that's buried there is Ebenezer's son, Nahum Plaisted. And I found him most interesting because he left Punkintown when he was 38 years old to go mining in Idaho, in Centerville, Idaho, which I'm told was one of 4 prominent mining camps that emerged during the Boise Basin Gold Rush of 1862. And when I found this picture, I'd like to think he's maybe somewhere in that picture. 17 years later, he ends up in Katask, Kittitas, Washington, as a farmer before coming back, having married Mary Capon Morris in Massachusetts when he was 60 years old. And the marriage, of course, didn't last long because he died 6 months later of chronic bronchitis. And he, as I say, he's buried with his parents in this lot. Next to the Plaisted home is the home of Enoch Emory. And before that, it was the home to Simon and Samuel and Israel Emory. So it probably predates, it probably goes back to the 1763 period as far as Emory's living there. And here you can see the foundation and the possible barn that's there. In a 1798 inventory of John Emory's property, a descendant, which includes the Frost Emory sawmill, it tells us he owned 40 acres with a 40-foot by 28-foot barn and a 2-story house. And adjoining him was also the farm of Daniel Emory with 16 acres, 2 barns, a 2-story dwelling, and two 1-story houses occupied by his sons Daniel and Nathan. And Daniel owned an additional 144 acres adjoining John Emory's property. So you can see there were a number of Emory families living in this area at the time. Enoch and Rhoda Emory's daughter Florence married Clarence Dennett Frost and went to live up on Frost Hill and is buried up here in the Frost Cemetery near their home. And Georgie Frost also lived on Frost Hill in this house that you see. Now another descendant, Sherman Emory, told me that his house at 759 Goodwin Road had been moved by his father, John Lord Emory, in 1910 from Pumpkintown, brought across the field with oxen. Although I can't verify that, but that is perfectly reasonable to assume that that can happen. It happened a lot in Elliott. And that house was said to be built, what, 1850? So. There's very little left today to be seen of the Emory Cemetery.
Yes,
And this picture is looking toward the rookery, the Heron Rookery, which in 1987 was the 8th largest in Maine. In 1951, one of the first acts of the newly formed American Legion was to obtain some plots at Mount Pleasant where they could bury veterans who had no other place to be buried. And Mount Pleasant deeded them for 4 lots. And they moved 2 veterans that year. And the first was Enoch Emory, who had served in the Civil War in the 7th Massachusetts Cavalry. You can see here the Undertaker's voucher. You can see the men of the American Legion digging up Emory's grave. The cemetery originally had a number of granite posts with iron rods, and they found a number of large granite pieces, which probably were also posts. There were 8 pieces that were 9 2/10 inch square and 5 feet long. Today, the site is marked with 3 posts. The bottom picture shows the grave of Enoch and Enoch's new stone on the right is at Mount Pleasant Cemetery today. Looking beyond the cemetery and to the right, if you can see in both of the bottom pictures, you're kind of looking the direction. You can see the site of a quarry. And if you look at that site, you can see the quarry area and a millstone waste product. And that particular one is a remnant of when they cut a millstone. This is the crescent-shaped piece of granite that's left from that. Looking beyond is Bartlett Mill Pond and the rookery. And the both of the cemeteries are on the border of this pond, or this area. We know that Thomas Bartlett built a sawmill there, and then later the Bartlett family also had a sawmill there. In fact, it was the last water-powered sawmill in Elliott. And I remember going there with my grandfather, Moses Paul. And I remember the building and the pile of dust and the machinery and the boards laid out. And I assume it was working at that time. But also at that time, Moses was helping Ned Bartlett build a dam that they called Little Dicky Dam, and set up a hydro facility, electric plant to generate electricity for the dairy down on Brixham Road and the house. And the cement holding tank was could hold 3,000 tons of water. And I'm pretty sure you'll see that holding tank and dam on the lower right. I'm pretty sure that that was where my grandmother, who was walking on the edge of it before it had filled with water, before they had let the dam come through, and broke her arm. And it was estimated that that hydro plant could produce 28 horsepower, and that it could power both the dairy and the house for 6 to 8 months if the water conditions were right. So it was quite the thing at the time. That was in the 1970s. We'd have to have Arthur Bartlett come and talk to us about what happened beyond that time. In August of 1976, the town of South Berwick voted to close the Lord's Lane extension, also known as Pumpkintown Road, to the Elliott line. It was approximately 1 mile, and I've tried to depict it on the lower left picture, the area that they were closing off. Elliott had already voted to close its part of Pumpkintown Road in 1941. There's another picture showing it coming from our section at the top down through to Lord's Lane, and Lord's Lane would then bring it down to what today is Goodwin Road, or Old Dover Road, across the river into Dover. So it was well established. You know, back in 1850, you can see it on the old maps, and you know it was well established before then. In the 1970s, there was a day camp run by the 4-H club, and they had a youth fair. The Rocky Hills 4-H ran a midway and a camp, and they taught adults and children how to swim. By the 1970s, there were a lot of changes there as people bought land and put camps next to York Pond and in that area. And that continued to be developed today. Now there are nicer homes there. And today it remains really a very beautiful area with trails. Great Works Land Trust, these are some of the trails that you can find there that you can take to see. They'll go by the cemetery and some of the sites. And it's really a wonderful thing that members of our community and Great Works Land Trust have worked to preserve this area. In 1987, Elliott Conservation Commission joined with the commissions of York and South Berwick to try to protect this area, because Land was being brought up for sale and being bought up, and development happening. And this was just before Levesque put in Woodland Hills and the Pike, what would become Pike Industries. The rock crushing began near that area, near the rookery. We had such dedicated servants in our community on our Conservation Commission, including Connie Weeks and Jack Murphy. And we had help from Silas Weeks and June Goodwin and June Brackett. June Brackett lived up in that area and was very involved in helping to preserve it. And Great Works Land Trust helped the town of Elliott in buying 100 acres from the estate of the Parsons, with Bainbridge Parson, the descendant, being very generous in his offer to help Elliott acquire lands, which became our town forest. So today, Great Works manages another 200 acres called the Rocky Hills Preserve, which also goes into the South York area. And the state of Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife owns a swath of land and manages another 145 acres. That is shown as 115-7 on this map. So that's the story I have of Pumpkintown. Let's see if I can escape. There. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, okay, so the big elephant in the room is, okay, so what happened? And if I can remember what I think happened, I'll tell you what I think happened. You know, it's been said that tuberculosis wiped it out, and the buildings burned down in 1916, which they really didn't, because the Paynes were living there all the way up until 1920. So my thought is that it was a culmination of things that happened. If you look at the deeds and the properties, I don't think there's enough to support a theory of a tuberculosis outbreak or a fire running through it. I think it was just a combination of grist mills becoming obsolete, the lumbering business petering out, the quarries petering out. And then you also had family members slowly leaving the area. And this had been happening, you know, before the 1920s, before 1930. Family members had left the area to work elsewhere. They'd taken their families elsewhere, like George Payne, who got married. He probably didn't want all those women, you know, interrupting his life with his new bride, so he left. And then you have people, you have buildings that are old, and you have people getting older and probably unable to care for them, like the Payne sisters. So that when Elmira, their aunt, died, they moved out onto Brixham Road. They kind of traded one dirt road for another, but at least they were nearer civilization. They were nearer people. They could better get around, especially in the old age. So I think that's more of what was happening. Because before that, some of the Simpson family members had already left. A lot of the other people had left. I assume maybe the Darlings, maybe they were there for the, maybe they were there for the quarrying opportunities, and so they left. That would be my thought, unless we can find some other information about why people, or why it just came apart. Because it was a traveled way, and people were there, and family was there. So I think that would be my thought. Hey, hi Janice.
I'm not talking. Boy, you're amazing. Unbelievable.
Well, while people are thinking about any questions I have for you, Roseanne, do we know where the name came from?
No, that's an interesting question. Some said it was all the fields of pumpkins growing there. But Parsons didn't seem to think so. I really don't know. You know, people have said things like, oh, they were backward people, they were inbreeding, they were, and I didn't find that at all in any of the information that I saw. But if you've heard people called pumpkin heads, perhaps it was a derogatory term for that area. I don't think the people there had any more problems with mental illness or aging or dementia than anybody else in the community. So I think so. But no, we don't know really why it's called Punkintown.
Okay. Should we open it up to questions? Anybody have any other questions for Roseanne, or anybody want to share any of their own knowledge of the area? And just unmute yourself if you want to. I think I allowed everyone to unmute if you need to. Or raise your hand or wave.
Sally?
I do recall what you was talking about, the Emory House on Goodwin Road. I do recall when I moved from growing up in South Elliott to come into, like, it was almost like another whole town at this end of Elliott. The story was that they had cleared the hill behind my house and rolled the Emory house on logs across the hill back of my house.
Wow. Wow, that's so neat. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
I don't know whether that's always what my husband had said, that those hills had been cleared and they rolled it across on logs. So whether it was true or not, but it sort of coincides with what you had said.
Yeah, I have no reason to doubt Sherman and what he told me about his house. So I'm sure it got there somehow.
Any other questions or stories? Nope, okay, then. Well, thank you, Roseanne. It was quite interesting. Well done, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Roseanne.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That was amazing.
Right, I'm going to stop recording. Unless we want the business part recorded. What do you think, Paul?
I don't, unless we do it for every meeting, there would be no need, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.